Welcome to our Tuesday, March the 3rd Strategic Planning Meeting. I now call this meeting to order. We do have several items to address this afternoon. One of those being a purchasing presentation. And for that, I will turn the floor over to our Budget and Finance Chairwoman, Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nicole, if you bring up Mr. Salmons.
Yes.
So while we're bringing him up, this is a follow-up on the many discussions we've had about how to more streamline purchasing. And this is a first step. And I have been working with Tony and Councilman Ledford. And so I'd like for you to go ahead, Tony, and present your PowerPoint.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of council. Today, we just want to take a couple of minutes and just share some information relative to our competitive seal proposal process change. And joining me today are members of our team. Our interim director of procurement is Vicki Haley, our deputy procurement director, Debbie Talley, and our legal representative from our city attorney's office, Ms. Harolda Bryson. And I'll share my screen. Is it visible for everyone?
Yes, thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and we'll go ahead and begin. Harolda.
Good afternoon, Council. The issue regarding the city's process for determining when a competitive seal proposal, or is what we commonly refer to as an RFP, should be used in lieu of a competitive seal bid was initially brought to our attention when the Audit Committee sent a letter to Mayor Burke and the City Council in August 2019. In essence, the letter pointed out that state law requires that prior to using an RFP to make a procurement, the municipal governing body makes the determination that the use of competitive sealed bidding is either not practicable or not advantageous to the municipality. However, our city code, as it is currently written, allows the purchasing agent to make that determination. During the course of working with the purchasing division to ensure that the city finds a way to come into compliance with state law, I have spoken with MTAS and the Assistant General Counsel in the Comptroller's Office. Both MTAS and the Comptroller's Office issued an important reminder for the city to heed as we work to resolve this issue, and that is, in Tennessee, bids are the preferred method of procurement for governmental entities. RFPs are the exception and should be used only after certain factors have been assessed. We are confident that after 18 months of numerous discussions and thoughtful consideration, that we have identified a process that will bring the city's RFP process into compliance with the requirements of state law. Vicki will now discuss the factors that must be assessed when determining the use of an RFP.
Thank you, Harolda. So when is an RFP allowed? TCA provides narrow guidelines where an RFP is an option instead of the preferred sealed bid. The first hurdle is to determine if a sealed bid is either not practicable, that's even though a sealed bid's the preferred method. Sometimes there are occasions when detailed, clear, concise bid specs cannot be developed, or when it's not advantageous. That's when we need somebody to help us come up with an assessment of what's in our best interest. Next slide, please. Once that first hurdle is met, it has to be clear that price is not the most important factor. Then one of these must apply. There must be multiple solutions, or we haven't been able to identify a solution and need assistance to develop one. We've developed an RFP format determination form that walks through all of these requirements as a way to document that an RFP is appropriate instead of a sealed bid. Tony's going to walk us through the process that we're recommending.
The process that we're speaking of, first, as we indicated, when we're looking at solicitations as an RFP for approval, will be done by council. It will first, the RFP determination form must be completed by the department. Then the purchasing review will take place. The purchasing agent will determine if indeed the rationale follows the TCA requirements. Once that has been completed, then the items will be submitted to council for review and approval. The recommendations will be made to City Council as an additional tab to the existing purchasing report that is presented to council on a weekly basis. This is a sample of what we're speaking of. The existing report that you receive each week that denotes the new purchases to be approved by council members, there will be an additional tab on that report each week when there are RFP requests that have been reviewed and has met the standards. We will then place that on the report. It will be presented to council. It will denote what department it is, what the RFP is, give a brief summary of that RFP, and all the associated documentation related to that particular item will be noted with a hyperlink that will be available for you to review. We are recommending to council that any discussion take place of these items during your 3:30 agenda session. This will give council and members of the departments who are requesting to have an RFP reviewed and approved to move forward. That discussion, questions and answers can be addressed during that time period. Vicki?
All right, what about award protests? TCA allows respondents the opportunity to protest a recommended award. The protest must be in writing. For RFPs, the protest must be received within 7 calendar days after the announcement of the award recommendation. And just to let you know, these are always taken care of prior to when we present them to council for a recommended award. TCA clearly says, and this is a quote, "The protest shall be filed with and decided by the municipal governing body." So we need your help to determine the time frame that responses are due, how those responses will be heard, the email, I'm assuming it's by email, the email where it will be sent. Harold is going to go over our next steps.
Thank you, Vicki. Before I get into the changes to our city code, Phil would like to say a few words about ethical considerations that the council, for the council.
Bottom line, since y'all will be making these decisions here on these matters, you have to comply with the ethics provisions here, the code here that are applicable, and we can't use your position in making an award in anything here that might be in violation of the ethics section of the code. So got to be careful about that regarding RFP requests to come directly to the council. So just be aware that you may get pushed one way or the other from folks to try to issue a request for production in that regard coming to you. Any type of request for, I guess, review will have to be pursued in accordance with the provisions of the city code, which are 2-757. And I, as the ethics officer, will have to monitor on cases if there's ever a complaint on that. So just be aware that potentially could be out there. There is also the aspect of the appeal process here in connection with this that we'll have to talk about at some point in time that's not currently in your ordinance. Under 12.3.1207D, as Vicki mentioned previously, that there has to be an adoptment adoption of a procurement code, and the procurement code has to provide that there's a method for an appeal to the council within 7 days after an award is announced. And that if there's a protest or an appeal, it'll be filed with and decided by the council if that occurs. So just be aware that that's out there.
Thank you, Phil. Phil briefly touched on this, but now that we have come to a proposed resolution for how the city can come into compliance with state law, the next big important step is to amend our city code so that it mirrors the language that's currently in state law. The most important change to city code will be that the purchasing agent will no longer have the authority to determine when an RFP can be used. Instead, the purchasing agent will be able to make a recommendation to City Council, as Tony mentioned in his presentation, regarding the use of an RFP, and the council will ultimately make that final decision. In addition to our city code, it's important that our procurement manual also mirror this language and that it come into compliance with state law. Phil and I will work with purchasing to make sure that the appropriate language is in both of these documents. Does anyone have any questions?
If you would take down the screen, please. I can't see the participants. If you would take down your share.
Yes, I'm trying to get that taken care of.
Okay, I see no questions right now. I do have one just to make sure I've got this. So number one, we have to come in compliance with state law. I get that. That's no big decision. We need to do that. Process-wise, most things come to us are going to be on a bid basis, and it's not necessarily the lowest, it's the lowest and best. Is that correct? Somebody?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's the
ma'am.
lowest that meets the bid specifications.
Well,
Applied with those.
yeah, whoever can comply the best at the best price is what we're saying.
Right.
In other words, yeah, I think I heard y'all say very clearly, it's not just the lowest bid. It's the lowest bid that the first thing is it meets what we need so that the money we spend, whatever, is well spent. Is that correct?
Yes.
On a bid, correct.
All right. So here's where you lost me, Tony. At what point do we decide, all right, some department is going to say, nope, this is real special and we want an RFP. That comes to us to decide, yeah, it needs an RFP.
First, they will complete the document that we mentioned to you, and then it's being reviewed by the purchasing agent to see if indeed it meets the need to move forward as an RFP. Otherwise, you'll never see it. It will be then told to them that this qualifies to be bid out. You can write specifications for this particular.
Where I got confused is it at the very end of the blue and white sheet, the purchases that we approve. At the end, you said when we approve it, we're approving, and that's where you lost me.
Basically, what you're approving is we're presenting those particular items that are being requested to move forward in an RFP process. You're
But
approving.
we'll have already seen it, right?
We'll provide that to you in advance, just like we send the purchasing report. You'll have that in advance to look at the information.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Councilman Gilbert? You're muted, sir.
Thank you. Tony, say for an example, we are okay, RFP or even a bid, and the next year we bid again or do it for the RFP. Do we have the ability, user-friendly, for anyone to complain about the services that they're providing? I know in the past, we said we had it, but it wasn't user-friendly. No one can get into it. Did we fix that?
We still experience issues with the current method that we have been utilizing. We are working to rectify that by having, with our new system, we'll be able to have people call in direct. We'll have access by sending email. Anyone that is having a problem with a product or service, if that is the department, we're meeting with them on a regular basis, and they will share that information. They don't have to wait till the meeting. If I'm having a problem with a particular product or service of a vendor, I'm going to contact my purchasing agent and then make them aware of it. They're then going to follow up with that vendor to find out what's going on and how we can take care of this particular issue, giving them reasonable amount of time to correct that action. If that is not adhered to, and then we know to move forward and look at either trying to have them again address that problem appropriately. And if they're unable to do so, then we move forward in trying to remove ourselves from that agreement.
So when will the system be user-friendly for everyone?
Well, the things that we can utilize that are simplistic, as I was indicating, is making ourselves more available in our contact methods by utilizing email, telephone, as well as our departments already know to contact their buyers, but they're our first customers. But if we're talking about external to our departments, they would need to contact our purchasing department. As it relates to, and I'm thinking back to a case that you had indicated to me in the past where there was a complaint about the services of a vendor. All we needed to have them do was to contact our buyers, and then they immediately would go into review with that particular vendor.
So in other words, if I had a complaint about a company as a council person, I just have to email purchasing about their complaint.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thanks.
That it?
That's it.
Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this question will be for Phil and Tony, however you want to respond. We currently have in our inboxes legislation that I presented and addresses the change to 2554 in regards to using the competitive versus RFP. Phil, this question's for you. Does that qualify and take care of our issue at hand? That'd be the first part, and I think you'll nod your head yes, but I'll let you answer. The second part is, Tony, you mentioned the protest procedure. Do you have language available right now with the city attorney that can be added to the ordinance I have placed before the body? And can we simply add that in and we solve this situation with one fell swoop?
You want Tony or me?
I like
Phil.
Tony. I like Tony. I like Tony better. No kidding, Phil.
Yes, we have language that we can add to the code. There is a section under 12.3.1207 that references how that can occur. It'll have to also be adopted by your procurement manual that is available. And MTAS is supposed to be in conjunction with the comptroller's office developing a model procurement code, but I don't believe we've seen that yet. I was just looking at the MTAS page to see if they have adopted it here, but we can clearly make the provisions here about how an appeal can be handled in our code here by adding one more section under at least referencing maybe section D in this code.
Okay, so my next question will be a process question, and that is, what we have now, Phil, that I have presented will solve the problem we have with getting in line with TCA, and it's basically the MTAS recommendation with some minor tweaks. And
yes, sir.
some spacing issues.
Yes.
So do we want, this will be a question, Mr. Chair or Madam Chair, do we want to wait on that additional language, or do we want to move forward and solve this as it has been recommended by MTAS for quite some time now, back in 2019? Or how soon can we get that language? And if we can get that language added to this ordinance, I would be completely open to adding that and get this on the agenda as soon as possible.
All right, and I think that's a good idea. So Phil, when do you think council might have the language in toto so that they know what they're looking at?
Well, clearly we can make the provisions to the code section changes here within a week. That's not a big problem. I'm not sure about the procurement manual provisions that would have to be adopted here as well, but that would also need to be adopted by you. And MTAS is actually saying that the governing body must adopt a procurement code by ordinance before purchases may be made through competitive seal proposals. So that's their recommendation.
So let me ask you this. Does it have to be in one fell swoop, or can it happen on what you just said? Kind of muddied the water for me a little bit.
Me too.
Yes, ma'am. And that is part of their at least recommendation they were making after this statute went into effect. They reviewed that back in 2018, but to my knowledge, there's not a uniform manual adoption procurement code that we can adopt. We can clearly adopt this portion to try to get there.
All right. So what we're doing is to say, in order to bring us in compliance with TCA and meet the best needs of the city, we want, and then the ordinance, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then following that, maybe not the same week, what we're saying is in order to bring our procurement manual into compliance.
Sure.
All right. So to answer your question, Councilman, Mr. Chair, I would like to put this on the 2-week agenda, please.
The 6th.
If I have a second.
Second.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds like we have a motion and a second to put this on the 2-week agenda.
Yeah, and Phil, if you would please
Yes,
get
ma'am.
the final language out.
I will. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. All right, Nicole, you can dismiss our guest. All right, before we move on, I would like to recognize and welcome Councilwoman-elect Rakita Dotley, who is joining us remotely this afternoon. Ms. Dotley, welcome aboard. We now have a presentation for non-congregate homeless shelter contract by Mr. Tyler Yunt. So, Madam Clerk, if you would bring Tyler in, please. And Council, I asked Tyler to come and present. They were wanting to get that on, I believe it was maybe this week's agenda, but I didn't feel comfortable placing an item like this on so soon without having at least a presentation first. So I think he will probably ask you to maybe place it on next week's agenda if you feel comfortable with it. So Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mr. Chair. I sent a memo to council earlier this morning about this. So it's in your email inboxes if you're looking for more information, but I will go over it briefly with you and answer any questions or concerns you might have. Since the winter months, our Homeless Services Division has been providing what in the COVID world we call non-congregate shelter, which is shelter for homeless individuals where people have separate bedrooms and bathrooms to minimize the spread of COVID-19. This has been a best practice that CDC and FEMA have recommended that communities do. And so cities around the country have been moving to this model for shelter for people experiencing homelessness during the COVID outbreak. Initially, we divided it up between a congregate facility at the community kitchen and a non-congregate facility and we had 25 rooms available in the winter months. Those were specifically held for people who, when they checked out into the community kitchen shelter, they were medically vulnerable, and should they contract COVID-19, were likely to die. And so those folks were prioritized for non-congregate shelter because of the limited room availability. Since that time in the winter, the federal government has expanded non-congregate shelter to be 100% FEMA reimbursable, whereas before it was 75% reimbursable, 25% local match. And also we're seeing a giant jump in unsheltered homelessness. Many of you routinely talk to us about encampment issues in your districts. And as those are abated and moved around, we've been seeing a grouping of larger encampments, which is putting those folks at risk. We're seeing health and safety issues in those encampments. And it's also making it very difficult for our homeless services team to work with permanent housing for people because they're constantly moving around the city. So in response to this, we looked at a couple of different methods to expand emergency shelter so that we could get people out of camps, off our streets, and into permanent housing. This was the most cost-effective way to do it. And what we have done is issued a request for bid out to hotels and to private security companies in a two-part bid. We received bids back last week. The Budgetel Inn at Exit 1, which we have been using prior to this for non-congregate shelter, came in with the lowest bid. And so for both services, for security services and for hotel. And so what is before y'all for approval is a contract with Budgetel to have up to 100 rooms for 90 days of non-congregate shelter. Of course, if we need to, we can extend this, but we want to be very nimble so that we can change as the pandemic changes and people get vaccinated, et cetera. The last piece of this is the cost for this is estimated to be up to $400,000. Somewhere around $300,000 and $400,000 is what we're planning and expecting. And the way that it works is we cover the cost up front, apply for FEMA reimbursement, and get reimbursed. We have experience doing this with our isolation shelter that exists at Salvation Army. Y'all have approved that as a COVID expense in the past. And so we know how to do it and know that, feel confident that FEMA is going to reimburse us and all of that stuff. The last piece of this is, council approval is the final step here. If y'all choose to take this up on vote tonight, we could have people in shelter tomorrow. If you need more time to discuss it, that's completely fine too. We can hear and discuss this further in other council meetings. But as Mr. Chair said, we wanted to, let it be your decision, and so that you can take the time that you need to make this.
All right, Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tyler, let me be the first to say good work. I've been very passionate about homeless situation in our city. You and I have emailed quite a few times, and then I can get very spirited about and very passionate about this situation. So I want to take my proverbial hat off to you for working very hard on finding this solution. I think it's strategic. I think it's smart. I think it's compassionate. I think it's impactful action that a lot of folks been wanting to see. So I applaud your efforts. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to say if there's any way that we can make a positive impact today, I would be in full support. However this council feels we can move forward with that. Good work, Tyler.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Burrs.
Yeah, great work, Tyler. As I told you, I'm really proud of what you've done. Where's the money coming from, the upfront money coming from?
So we have COVID-19 expense codes that we use for specific COVID-19 expenses, and we have a subcategory for FEMA expenses. So we track that through that, and it basically, Daisy can probably tell you exactly specifically where it comes from, but we do track it.
So, well, yeah, the question was, and I'm sure you do, does this put any other area because of the budget we're working on? Is this coming from reserves? Is this coming, I realize it's reimbursable, just for the public to understand where it's coming from.
I am not completely sure that I don't want to give you the wrong answer. So I'm going to ask if maybe Mara or Daisy is here to back me up.
Is Daisy here?
Yes, she's on the call. You want to bring Daisy in, Councilwoman?
Yeah, this isn't a big deal. I think we should approve it. I just want to know for balanced budget purposes where it's coming from.
There she comes.
You're muted. Okay.
Good afternoon, Daisy.
Hello. Okay, Councilman Burrs, would you re-ask the question to make sure I get it right?
Well, there's, I forget what's the amount, Tyler. It's several $100,000, 400,000. And hopefully, and I see no reason why it wouldn't be reimbursable from FEMA. And I just want to know where that original money is coming from.
Well, as you know, with just about any grant that we get, the money has to be spent first and then reimbursed.
Yeah, got that.
So we have to have the cash flow in place. For projects that have not already been approved by the grantor, any spending, typically we don't spend those dollars without a grant approval.
Mm-hmm.
And if we did, those dollars would either be specifically budgeted in our existing budget, or there's available funds in the existing budget to cover the project depending upon the size of it, pending reimbursement. But as a matter of routine, expenditures that relate to projects that are to be funded with external sources, federal or state, this council would generally approve applying for and accepting that grant, and then we make those expenditures in anticipation of that grant.
I know that. I just want to know this original money before it's reimbursed comes from what pot?
It comes from the city's cash pool. The city has to fund the dollars up front, and they're not really infringing upon any other budget. It's basically from the city's cash pool, dollars that are available in reserves until it is reimbursed.
In reserves, okay. Yes. Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you very much. I think it's a great idea, Mr. Chair. I think we should go forward as soon as possible.
Councilwoman Konrad.
Thank you, Chair. Great work, Tyler. I do hope you all are able to get those individuals in the count on West Side going towards Missionary Ridge housed. My question is, October 2020, you presented along with some other staff and said that you all were looking to purchase a hotel. So did it, and the funds that were going to be used with that was the CSB dollars, the grant for COVID funds, and other additional we had up, and it specifically say, under the mayor's plan, more than $1 million could be used towards this purpose. So did we shift from purchasing the actual hotel to leasing the hotel rooms?
No, it's both and. So we did not forget about that project. We've been working diligently on that project since y'all have approved it for that use. We found multiple properties that would fit the use, and currently are doing some due diligence. We have to submit to HUD some environmentals for those properties. And so that's kind of the stage we're at now. The next step that it comes from is once we have those environmental results back and it doesn't look like there's going to be any negative impacts on using that property as a shelter, it comes to Planning Commission and then City Council under mandatory referral for us to purchase that property. So that's coming. It's coming probably for the new council. But we're still very much working on that and aim to have it completed as soon as we can.
Okay, so really it's the council people that's here except for two. But so the money that we voted on this back in October, that's not the money we're using to lease the budget in.
No, ma'am. As Ms. Madison said, this is coming out of our cash pool. It's a separate funding stream. We get reimbursed by FEMA. It can be as fast as 3 months or 6 months is usually like the average. And so that money comes back to us and is kind of completely covered by the federal government at that point.
Okay, thank you for that. Miss Daisy, so I know before, like we had talked about being reimbursed for FEMA and certain projects that you were requiring to be reimbursed, and we kind of did that, but we never received a reimbursement. So do you think that we would encounter any problems on getting the reimbursements back? Or, I mean, is it safe to go ahead and deploy the funds on our end and think that we're going to get it? Is there anything in writing that's saying that we're going to be guaranteed to get this money back? Or you've already went through that process?
Once the grant is approved by the federal agency, there is, I'm assured and I feel confident that we would get it back. The only condition is that we have to make sure we spend it in accordance with the terms of the contract or the grant, which the management team here is very conscious of. So we really, as a rule, don't have a problem with grant reimbursements.
Okay, well, I'm like Councilwoman, I'd like to see this executed so we can get it done. But I'm gonna end with saying this, and I know Jerry got his hand up, but we said that same thing about outside of Wilcox Tunnel, the slide. We were very confident about receiving the grant funding from FEMA, and come budgets later, that site is still not done. And we're still saying FEMA didn't approve the grant, but FEMA is saying they did approve the grant, and that site is still not fit. But I know that's not your fault, Miss Daisy, but I just, want to let that be known.
I'll just add, Councilwoman Konrad, we also coordinated with TEMA on this, and they assigned a consultant that's familiar with FEMA and this grant, and made sure that everything that we're going to do for this project is going to be an allowable expense, and got that in writing. So we do have a little bit of assurances, and we also know that through COVID-19, FEMA reimbursable expenses, so far so good. Like we're getting what FEMA has said that we can get.
Okay, thank you, Tyler.
Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tyler, great work, as everyone else has said. We've spoken about this before, so I know it's on your mind. But I hear shelter and I hear security. Is there any component of this that would also have to do with transportation services for these folks?
Yes, so we have worked with Budgetel to have a hotel shuttle, that we would get going to a hotel that can provide transportation back and forth from 11th Street. But to the extent possible, we want to co-locate services here. And so I mentioned in the memo, there are several homeless service agencies that have funding and staff now coming from the federal government for permanent housing and getting people out of the shelter into permanent housing. And so they will be, constantly at the hotel working with folks, as well as, the Homeless Healthcare Center has a mobile vaccination clinic. And so this is another benefit to this. Like if everybody's all in one place, it makes it easy for us to get people vaccinated as well. So to the extent we can bring services to them, we will, but if not, there's a shuttle service that can take people to appointments and such.
That's excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I see no other hands. Tyler, one thing that always concerns me about grants, sometimes when the money runs out, there's leftover residue that we're on the hook for. In this case, once the money runs out, we're finished. There's no leftover residue, correct?
That's correct, yeah. And on this specific item, we know that for the next 90 days, at least, this is going to be 100% FEMA reimbursable. We wanted to keep it in kind of spurts like that because we don't know what the future of the FEMA emergency COVID order is going to be. So, you know, we may be coming back eventually for extension or some adjustments to this program, but for now, we're calling it at 90 days.
Okay. All right, council, from what I'm hearing, everybody is ready to put it on the agenda this afternoon.
I move we put it on the
Yeah.
agenda.
Okay, is there any objection from this council for putting it on this afternoon?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Noblet,
Yes, sir.
would you prepare that and send it to our clerk so that our agenda can be updated to include this item for
Yes,
this
sir.
afternoon?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, great job, everybody. Madam Clerk, you can dismiss our guest at this time.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right, next item on our agenda is the Juneteenth holiday that Councilwoman Konrad has requested to discuss. I did ask our clerk to go back and send everyone the information that was presented to us, I think back on August the 18th, so that you would have something to refer back to. But at this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Councilwoman Konrad.
Thank you, Chair. Last week, I stated that we needed a holiday for Black people, and I got a couple of phone calls about the way that I stated that. And I just want to quickly clarify why. So many people often default to using the words African American out of the desire for political correctness or politeness. I have had to take on different identities at different periods of my life, but my Blackness is the overarching umbrella of the different flavors of my identity. I am Black, I identify as Black, and I embrace that because it's my culture. So when we talk about the why Juneteenth should be declared as a city holiday for our employees, is that Juneteenth is very significant. And I get it, it is threatening to some because July 4th, 1776, it did not do what Juneteenth does. Juneteenth, what that does is it, it actually free all Americans, right? So it's inclusive to all, not just, you know, it's specifically geared towards Black people, because on that specific day, 250,000 Black slaves received the news that they would, by, you know, executive order decree, that we were no longer slaves in Texas, right? So to me, that's something to be celebrated. July the 4th, although we celebrate that as an Independence Day, but it's not an Independence Day that's inclusive of all of Americans. So it only gave us independence from Britain. And at that time, you all know that slavery was still going about, right? And so what this happens, we can't go back to that day to change what was happening. And that was the socioeconomics of it. And we all know that to be slavery, right? So I'm just asking for our council to take a second look at it. I know Daisy and them presented the numbers and told us that we've got 11 holidays. Here, 2 of them are shared days, like 2 days that we celebrate during those times. But even when we look at the list of the holidays that we already celebrate as city holidays, they're not inclusive to all people. Juneteenth is inclusive to everybody. It's about reclaiming our history, rejoicing in the progress we've made, and recommitting to the work yet undone. Chattanooga still has a long way to go to reckon with and overcome the dark legacy of slavery and violence and injustice that has persisted after its end. So Juneteenth, it is an inclusive holiday for all people. And it's not just, Black people just celebrate it because it's the day that we were free. That's all I have, Trey.
All right. Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought that was very well done, Councilwoman, and thank you. I guess I go back to every once in a while, I find myself saying with my partners, when are we going to do something to show that we are different and we really want to see something that makes a change and acknowledges the truth that's out there that we still don't like to talk about because it's painful. I personally think we should do this. If we want to go checking to see trading one holiday for another or something like that, I'm okay with that. But to me, I just feel it's very important that we do this and show that Chattanooga is moving and willing to recognize, for one, a great leader on this council for the last 4 years, Demetrius Konrad. But not just for Demetrius, it's for all of us. And the sooner we can really grab a hold of that and say, yes, let's charge for it, not let's move slowly forward over the years of many decades. I guess that's really all I have to say. I'm in total support of trying to get this done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. All right, I am seeing no other hand. Here we go. Councilman Gilbert. You are muted, sir.
The question is where we go from there, where we go from here. Councilwoman Konrad presented the situation. Councilman Jerry Mitchell has gave his opinion. So where do we go from here?
To put it on the agenda.
So I'm saying that Councilwoman Konrad will probably get with Phil to develop something, or might be already developed, to put it on the agenda.
Yeah, Phil, he drafted up legislation and he circulated it back in August last year to council. He can recirculate it again. But I would like to be, just like Jerry stated, like it's time for us to really grab hold of it and move forward. Like we keep putting this under a bush because we don't want to truly address what's been happening towards Black people. And I think it's time that this city council, we've been great at tackling these kind of issues and helping to move the city forward. And I think it's time that we do it. It's not enough for us to continue to talk about diversity and inclusion and whatever other words we care to use if we're not truly gonna make a difference and apply some of the things that needs to be done to change it.
So what we're saying is that we want to put this on the agenda this month, next month, or when, because we got to have a deadline.
On the agenda if we could do it next week, I'm cool with next week, or we could do it in 2 weeks. As you all always hold me accountable to the 2-week mark. So hey, we can get it next week. I'm cool with that. If you all insist on it being on a 2-week outlook, then I'm cool with that too. All I need is a second.
I'll say that, but what I would say is I'm running out of time. April 6th. Is this a resolution, Mr. Attorney, or is this an ordinance?
The resolution was already adopted here, designating it as a city holiday on here, or at least a day of commemoration. If you're going to have to include that as a budgeted item, that would have to be as a ordinance for an amendment to the budget.
Yeah, that's.
Okay.
All right, Councilman Gilbert has the floor.
Well,
any follow-up questions to this?
I'm still questioning. The Councilwoman Konrad said either a week or 2 weeks. So she already got a second from Mr. Councilman Mitchell. So I guess we just go forward with that, correct?
Well, so here's what I would suggest. Now I see a couple of other hands. I think the legislation needs to be put on the floor and follow our process, which is put it in committee and then bring it out of committee onto the agenda. That's the normal process that we take any legislation that we want to bring forward. And let me remind you, it does have budgetary implications. In fact, in the presentation that Daisy and Beverly made, I think back in August, we're talking about around $690,000, I think. If we add this holiday, I think we need to have a discussion about how we spend $690,000, particularly when we're talking about addressing the salaries of our employees. That's all I'm gonna say for right now. Councilman Oglesby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's pretty much where I was going with this, was like the process to get it implemented. And there's the budgetary concerns, and then would it start this year? Would it start next year? Particularly since, you know, we're ending the current 2021 cycle, and then we're getting ready to budget for 22. So those was questions that I would like answered to get it, you know, should it pass to get it implemented, taking those things under consideration. That's all I have.
All right, Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's two ways of doing this, and I think Phil talked about those already. We've already passed a resolution recognizing that Juneteenth, and we should recognize it every year. The whole other issue is the $600,000 budget amendment. And so if you want to have budget hearings and everything, if it's a budget amendment, then we got to follow that process, which means public hearing, all of that sort of thing. So council, it's not just a matter of putting it on the agenda because of the impact of the budget. So we can go a number of ways. We can recognize the holiday for what it is, which is really an important holiday. Or irrespective of the holiday, we need to do it as a budget amendment. It's a little over $600,000, which is cool if this is what you guys want to do. But then legally, we have to go through the budget amendment process. And whatever you want to do, just make a decision. But that's the first decision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess you're going to lose me for a budget amendment, but I just would ask the question, what makes Juneteenth less important than any of the other 11 holidays other than it's come up last? And there's reasons it's come up last. And those are reasons we need to be addressing not only this council, but the future council and the future council. And that's the question I would ask of this council. And good luck with your decisions. I'm sorry I won't be around to help you with it, but I think you know my feelings well enough now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Konrad.
Thank you, Chair. Phil, how much public notice do we need to give the public for a budget amendment?
Any type of budget amendment, we have, it's more than just 7 days. I believe it's 30 days. I will have to double check here, but I believe for an amendment there that is required under state law for us to do that.
Okay, because I've seen one, every council person, when they present something, they don't put it in into the committee. Two, I've seen it pushed through for emergency reasons, as to say, so we can get budget amendments done. And so again, I'm going to address this fact that every time I present something, you all want to be sticklers to the process of what we do with council. So from this day forward, everybody needs to abide by the process. It's on the left or here, but we need to abide by it, because right now what you're showing me is that you're going to stick me to it, and it's where privilege come in at, and we need to stop that. It needs to end today. So, Chair, I would like for it to be put in committee so we can hear it. Phil, I'd like for you to draft up the legislation and have Ms. Nicole put the public notice out so we can move this legislation forward. The last 4 years, this council have used stalled tactics on important issues that need to move our city forward. This next 4 years, we need to end that practice of doing that. We need to end it, and we need to do what's right.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Gilbert.
Councilman Mitchell hit it the nail on the head. what's the weight of all the holidays? What makes one more important than the other? If they was there beforehand, I know that recently, the last, I guess 4 years, we added 2 more days. So what is the weight? How we determine one holiday versus another holiday? Is it the importance of it? What is it? So that we can make a determination of why we can't put one versus the other. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Let me just quickly add, we did pass a resolution recognizing Juneteenth as a holiday. One interesting note in the slide presentation that our clerk sent out, for the next 2 Juneteenths, they fall on a weekend, which to my knowledge would not create budgetary implications. Not till FY23, I think, would it become have budgetary implications. All that being said, a budget amendment does require a public hearing, period. It's no way around it. So if you still want to, Councilwoman Konrad, go forward with this, we need to get the ordinance into our hands, into the committee. And then if we want to present a public hearing, we'll give proper notification and then go from there. Councilman Oglesby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Typically, when a holiday falls on a weekend, it's usually celebrated either preceding day or the day afterwards. So there is budget implications behind it. And Councilwoman Konrad and everybody, is the ultimate goal to start this coming June 19th of this year. Then that dictates the timing that we have to get everything in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can start it next year because this Juneteenth is right here on our heels. We can actually start it next year, but I don't want that to be used as another stall tactic. Like I want to move forward with it, Chair.
Okay, very well. Thank you, ma'am. All right, moving to our next item. We've got panhandling ordinance pending presentations, education sessions. I think Councilman or Vice Chair Smith is still looking to have that ordinance in legislative committee. I do have some future legislation that we could place in legislative committee as well. That would give us 2 items to address. If you would drop down to 5C under 1 resolution, residency requirement for sworn emergency personnel. You have in your packet that resolution, and basically what it does is it's a resolution asking the city attorney to get an interpretation from the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Tennessee on certain provisions of the order that was given in the Brown versus the City of Chattanooga. Basically, recent discussions at the state have sort of shed some light on these residency requirements as to our sworn personnel. And what I would like to do is ask the city attorney to get an interpretation to see if we are still under that order. And if we're not under that order, have wording crafted that we could place it to our voters to change the charter. The residency requirements are in the charter, so the charter would have to be changed as well. Just let me tell you that I have spoken to both chiefs, and they are both very supportive of removing these residency requirements that we have placed on us. They feel like it would help them in recruiting. So really, I think that's the bottom line, is making sure that we have a deep recruiting pool that we can draw from. Being a border city does sort of hamper our recruiting efforts, from being able to recruit in a wide radius. So I'm going to present this to the council and ask that this be placed. Now, I know the vice chair is not with us, and I can ask him at the 3:30, but I would like for this to be placed in legislative committee as soon as possible so that it can be heard. And then if we're ready to move it forward, place it on the agenda. Councilman Gilbert, is that a new hand, sir?
Yes, new hand. It's basically Phil. Phil?
Yes, sir.
What determines if we met it or not met it? The requirement, when they actually developed this in 1990, Brown versus the city of Chattanooga, what measurement did they have? And to meet it or not meet it, because technically I don't think we even came close to meeting it, but that's my opinion. And well, answer that question first.
There was an order that was issued in 1990 by Judge R. Allen Edgar at that point in time, who was the federal district judge that heard the voting rights case involving the city that was brought by Dr. Tommy Brown and a number of folks at that point in time versus the city of Chattanooga. The court waited for the parties to come up with a solution to how things should move forward, many of which are placed in your current charter that you have in the city of Chattanooga. Those were all matters that were added in an agreed order between the parties to that litigation, and all of the attorneys and the parties that were involved in that case filed a plan in connection with that court ruling back in 1990. One of the provisions of that court order that was in effect in 1990 was a specific provision in paragraph 31 of that document that said that all employees of the city are required to be either registered voters in the state of Tennessee or eligible to vote in the state of Tennessee, except for those employees that were living outside the state at that point in time. That is the reason that your charter currently at section 3.1.1 requires that all employees of the city are to be residents of the state, and the only people that are exempted from that are those folks that were hired on or before January 18th, 1990, when that order went down, and have lived outside the state continuously since that date. So everybody else is at least required to live in the state of Tennessee. This was a requirement by that order by Judge Edgar at that time, and the concern is whether there is any provision of that order that is still in effect at this point. We have attempted to contact the federal court regarding this as to whether that order has ever been lifted or not. And that's one of the things we're looking about. We're having to gather that information from the archives of the federal court system in Atlanta, Georgia now, where that is involved. And hopefully we will obtain an answer as to whether that occurs. I have some memory of Judge Edgar saying that this order was no longer in effect at this point because the census had been completed in 1990, and at that point in time in 2000 and 2010, in an attempt to try to provide for your district representation, which is also required by that order and which has to be adjusted every decennial census. But I believe that that provision it's clearly in the order and it's in your charter, and that's the question of whether state law could override that.
And where are we at with state law?
Well, the state statute, there is, I guess, a pending legislation at this point in time that is coming out of Memphis, I believe, Memphis area, that is saying that they want all employees to be able to be hired from out of state or in state to widen the pool of individuals that might be hired by municipalities. And currently, I believe the city of Chattanooga is out of that based upon the amendments that Senator Cardin has recommended.
Phil, it's my understanding that bill is dead and it's down in flames.
Yeah, it went to summer.
So it's no longer.
It's no longer in effect. Okay.
In effect, yeah.
So Phil, based off the purpose of the 1990 of putting it in there, it was a purpose of that because of what?
I believe the concern of the ACLU at the time that that case was filed was to try to make sure that there was a larger percentage of municipal employees that were hired who are residents of the city. If you could narrow it down to just a city residency, that would potentially result in a larger number of individuals from being hired that would have an interest in city business. The concern about that here in our area is that we also have a boundary that is near Georgia and is near Alabama, which also requires a municipal cost associated with the accounting and the payment of income taxes to both those states if those folks are city employees. And the question of whether your tax dollars going to pay Georgia income tax and Alabama income tax was one of the reasons for reducing this to only city residents of the state of Tennessee.
Will that weaken our Black trying to get more onto the fire department or the police department? Because I think that was kind of in the purpose of not having people that look like the other person on the force. Was that not the theory behind that too?
That could be a problem insofar as how your numbers are, at least as to individuals that would be representative of the Chattanooga community versus representative of a larger area.
So we're looking at most of the people in the rural area that we're trying to bring in, and that's not helping us none when it comes to African Americans, correct?
It depends on if you had African Americans living in North Georgia or North Alabama that might want to be hired.
Ain't that many.
Well, that potentially could be a problem.
All right, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to voice my support in your efforts to bring this conversation forward in the year 2021, because as we know, the state legislation did go to summer study, and so basically that's where good bills go to die, as they say. We have a housing shortage, we have personnel shortage, we have a recruitment issues that if you spend any time with our police officers and our firefighters, you will find out they try the best to recruit, but you can live in Memphis, Tennessee and work for Chattanooga Fire Department, but you can't live across in Rossville, Georgia. And I think that's something we need to not only address, but I think it's something we need to seriously consider and maybe even let the voters decide. But I support you in your effort in that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Konrad.
I'm not sure as of yet if it's something that I can support. I'm with my colleague. Like, it's important to me to make sure that people in the city of Chattanooga will be able to obtain employment. And, you know, just thinking back over the past year of the protest and everything that, you know, was rampant, and you know, those bordering states, it can create a problem. And that's my opinion. And I think, you know, just to say, for if we're going to open it up to the fire and police, we should open it up to other employees as well, not just fire and police. We had the reason we can't get anybody to become a firefighter or police is because of the pay. That's the question we're trying to avoid. We're not going to recruit those people from Georgia and Alabama if our pay doesn't reflect what Georgia and Alabama is paying. That's the discussion we need to put out there in the committee.
Is that it, Councilwoman?
That's it.
Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. With all due respect, I'm going to argue against extending the borders. And let me tell you the reason why. A very important issue is the income tax issue and the money that we're paying to other states. That's number one. Number two, the Brown case was a seminal case. It was very important to level the playing field for people of color in Chattanooga. And my colleagues bring up a very important point there. Number three, Councilwoman, I think, is exactly correct. We have trouble recruiting because of our salaries. We need to look very seriously at raising the salaries. I believe we don't even meet the level of the county. With our police persons having to deal with a lot more and a lot different aspects of law enforcement, we need to look at raising the salaries. I believe that's the reason we can't recruit, and not because we have to go across county lines, because the pool isn't there. I think the pool is there. And I think that we need to revamp the way we think about how we pay city employees. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, we'll all get a chance to vote on this resolution in the coming weeks after it's gone through committee and placed on the agenda. And I will ask at 3:30 the vice chair to place that in committee. All right, I think that covers just about everything on our agenda as far as strategic planning goes. I think we do need an attorney-client privilege meeting, Mr. Attorney. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, briefly, and I'll try to get your other thing on for the 3:30 when I can talk to Maria here in a minute.
Okay, Councilwoman Konrad, I see your hand up.
Yeah, real quick, Chair. So when you ask him to put your legislation in committee, will you ask him to put that Juneteenth legislation in as soon as possible?
He'll have to have it first, ma'am, and that goes to budget and finance because it is a budgetary consideration.
Okay, I just want to make sure you ask that too, though. Thank you.
Well, you can ask it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, at this time, we will end this strategic planning meeting and we will rejoin, I guess, in an attorney-client privilege meeting. All right, see everyone back shortly.